I never knew a single photograph could shatter everything I believed about love, courage, and what it means to survive. My name is Sarah Whitmore. I'm 62 years old, and I spent my entire life believing my grandfather James was a simple war hero, decorated, honorable, uncomplicated. That changed the morning I discovered a hidden compartment in his old military footlocker, the one that had sat untouched in my father's study for 40 years. Inside that narrow space, wrapped in oilcloth and bound with a faded ribbon, were 23 letters written in 3 different hands, a forged identity card bearing my grandfather's signature, and a single photograph of a young woman whose face I'd never seen, but whose eyes held a story that would consume me for the next 6 months. What I discovered inside those documents changed every story I had ever been told about my family, about the war, about the quiet man who died when I was 12 and never once spoke of what he'd truly done between 1943 and 1945. The truth I found was more beautiful and more terrible than anything I could have imagined. A love that defied every law of man and nature, a courage that cost more than medals could ever measure, and a sacrifice that echoed through 3 generations. You will be deeply moved by this story. Let me begin from the very start, in a forest clearing in occupied Belgium, where death wore a gray uniform and hope had almost no face at all. January 1944. The Ardennes forest, Belgian-German border. The snow fell in silence, the kind of silence that comes after gunfire when even the birds have learned not to sing. Lieutenant James Whitmore crouched behind the skeletal remains of a burned-out farmhouse, his breath forming small clouds in the frozen air, his rifle cold against his gloved hands. 24 hours earlier, his reconnaissance unit had been separated from the main British advance during a German counterattack. Now there were only 3 of them left: himself, Corporal Davies with his shattered leg, and Private Mason, who hadn't spoken since watching his best friend die. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction, pine trees heavy with snow, their branches creating a cathedral of shadows and pale winter light. James had been trained for this: survival behind enemy lines, evasion, extraction. But nothing in his training had prepared him for what he was about to find. It was Mason who heard it first. A sound so faint it might have been the wind, a whimper that could have been an animal caught in a trap. James raised his hand, signaling silence, his ears straining against the muffled quiet of the snow-covered world. There it was again, human, female, desperate. "Could be a trap, sir," Davies whispered, his face gray with pain. "Germans use decoys." James knew that. Every soldier knew that. But something in that sound, the raw edge of terror, the exhaustion that came from running too long with nowhere left to run, made him move before his mind could argue with his instincts. He found her 50 meters into the tree line, and at first he thought she was already dead. She lay curled in the snow beneath a fallen spruce, her body so small and still that she seemed like part of the landscape itself, another casualty of a forest that had seen too many. Her clothes were wrong for winter, a thin dress beneath a man's coat 3 sizes too large, no gloves, no proper shoes. Her feet were wrapped in rags that had once been cloth, but were now frozen stiff with ice and blood. Her hair, dark and matted, spread across the snow like spilled ink. But it was her face that stopped James's heart. She couldn't have been more than 17, maybe younger. It was impossible to tell through the exhaustion and hypothermia. Her lips were blue, her skin the color of old parchment, but her eyes, half open and unfocused, held something James had seen in mirrors after too many battles. The look of someone who had survived past the point where survival made sense. "Christ," Mason breathed behind him. "She's just a kid." James knelt beside her, pulling off his glove to touch her throat. There, faint but present, a pulse like a bird's wing, fluttering and irregular. He could see now what he'd missed at first glance. The yellow star sewn crudely onto the coat, half hidden beneath the snow. A Jewish star. And beneath it, barely visible, numbers tattooed on her wrist. In that moment, James Whitmore made a decision that would define the rest of his life. "We're taking her," he said. Davies shifted his weight, wincing. "Sir, we can barely carry ourselves. She's half dead already, and every hour we stay here." "We're taking her," James repeated, and something in his voice made both men fall silent. He lifted her as carefully as he could, shocked by how little she weighed. Nothing but bones and will, he thought, and even the will was guttering like a candle in wind. She made a small sound, her eyes opening wider, and he saw the fear flood in, saw her try to pull away with arms that had no strength left in them. "Shoo," he murmured, the same tone he'd used with his sister's children back home, a lifetime ago in a world where children weren't hunted like animals. "You're safe now. I promise you're safe." He didn't know if she understood English. He didn't know if she understood anything anymore. But something in his voice, or perhaps simply the warmth of his body after so long in the snow, made her go still. Her head fell against his shoulder, and he felt the irregular rhythm of her breathing, felt her shivering so violently he thought her bones might break. Later, much later, when all the choices had been made and paid for, James would remember that moment as the one where his old life ended. He had been a good soldier, a good man, someone who followed orders and believed in duty and king and country. But in that snow-covered forest, with a dying girl in his arms and the weight of an impossible promise settling onto his shoulders, he became something else entirely. He became someone willing to risk everything for a stranger. Little did I know, reading his letters 70 years later, that this moment would explain so much about the grandfather I thought I knew, the silences at dinner tables, the way he never spoke of his decorations, the shadows that lived behind his eyes even when he smiled at us children. This was where it all began, with an act of mercy that would demand a lifetime of secrets. Mason led the way back to their hiding place, checking for German patrols, while James carried his impossible burden through the snow. Each step was a negotiation with fate, each minute a gift he wasn't sure they deserved. The girl, he didn't even know her name yet, drifted in and out of consciousness, murmuring words he couldn't understand, her fingers occasionally clutching at his uniform with desperate, unconscious strength. By the time they reached the ruined farmhouse, James's arms were numb and his back screamed with exhaustion. But he felt strangely alive in a way he hadn't since the war began. Davies had managed to get a small fire going in the remains of the cellar, using debris that gave off more smoke than heat. But it was something. James laid the girl down as gently as he could, wrapping her in both his coat and Davies's, watching her face for signs of consciousness. "What's your name?" he asked softly, knowing she probably couldn't answer, needing to ask anyway. Her eyes opened, focused on him with an intensity that seemed impossible given her condition. Her lips moved, and he leaned closer, straining to hear. "Rachel," she whispered, the word barely more than breath. "My name, Rachel." And then she was unconscious again, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion now that someone else was keeping watch. James sat back, his mind already racing through the impossibilities ahead. They were behind enemy lines with limited supplies, a wounded man, and now a Jewish refugee who would be shot on sight by any German patrol. Their orders had been reconnaissance and return. He had no authorization to deviate from mission parameters. Certainly no authorization to risk 3 British lives for 1 civilian, no matter how young or desperate. But when he looked at Rachel's face, peaceful for the first time since he'd found her, he knew that orders and authorization meant nothing anymore. He would get her out. Somehow he would get her out. That was when I realized, holding those letters in my grandmother's attic, that love doesn't always announce itself with trumpets and grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in a forest clearing, disguised as duty or mercy or simple human decency. Sometimes it changes everything without asking permission first. The first letter 3 days later, huddled in an abandoned shepherd's hut while German patrols swept the forest, James wrote his first letter. Not to his commanding officer, not to British intelligence. Those reports would come later, carefully edited, leaving out the parts that mattered most. This letter was different. This letter was written in the margins of a requisition form, in handwriting so small it could barely be read, addressed to no one and everyone at once. I found her dying in the snow, and now I cannot imagine a world where I didn't. Is this madness? Is this what happens when a man has seen too much death and starts clutching at life wherever he can find it? She doesn't speak much, trauma, exhaustion, or perhaps she simply has no words left for what she's endured. But when she looks at me, I see something I haven't seen in years: trust. Unearned, undeserved, absolute trust. How can I betray that? How can I deliver her to safety and then walk away? Davies says I'm thinking with my heart instead of my head, and he's right. But my head has kept me alive this long while my heart has been dying by inches. Maybe it's time to let the heart have a turn. What I found next would explain everything and break my heart in ways I'm still processing. Rachel didn't speak for 3 more days. She existed in that peculiar state between life and death, her body fighting pneumonia while James and his men fought to keep her warm, to find food, to stay hidden. Davies remained pragmatic. They needed to move, to reach Allied lines, to complete their mission. Mason, barely out of his teens himself, looked at Rachel with the protectiveness of a brother who'd failed to save his own siblings from London's bombing raids. But it was James who sat with her through the fevered nights, who held water to her cracked lips, who whispered promises he had no authority to make. And slowly, impossibly, she came back. The first real words came on the 4th morning. James was changing the dressing on her frostbitten feet, a makeshift bandage torn from his own undershirt, when her hand touched his wrist, gentle as a bird landing. "Why?" she asked in heavily accented English. "Why you save me?" James looked up into eyes that had seen things no teenager should ever witness. He could have given her any number of answers: duty, orders, common decency. Instead, he told her the truth. "Because leaving you there would have killed something in me I'm not ready to lose yet." She studied his face for a long moment, as if memorizing it, as if needing to believe that kindness still existed somewhere in the world. Then she did something that nearly destroyed him. She smiled. It was barely there, a ghost of what her smile must have been before the war broke her. But it was real. "My father," she said slowly, carefully, "he tell me stories. About British soldiers. Honor. Courage." Her eyes filled with tears she was too exhausted to shed. "I think they are only stories. But you are real." Over the following days, as they waited for Davies's leg to heal enough for travel, Rachel's story emerged in fragments, like pieces of shattered glass slowly being assembled into something recognizable. She had been from Antwerp, daughter of a watchmaker and a music teacher. When the Germans came in 1940, her family had tried to hide, moving from safe house to safe house, surviving on courage and luck and the kindness of strangers. But luck runs out. Her parents had been taken in a raid 8 months ago. Her 2 younger brothers vanished into the machinery of deportation. Rachel had escaped only because she'd been out trading jewelry for food when the Gestapo came. Since then, she'd been running. Always running. Through Belgium, into France, back to Belgium when the borders shifted. She'd worked as a maid for a resistance family, been caught and beaten, escaped during a transfer. She'd hidden in barns and cellars and, once, in a coffin for 3 days while German soldiers searched the town around her. She'd watched people die for helping her. She'd learned to move like a shadow, to make herself small and forgettable, to survive when survival seemed impossible. "But I was tired," she told James one night, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "So tired. When I fell in the snow, I think, maybe it's better this way. Maybe it's time to stop running." "And now?" James asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Rachel looked at him, and in her eyes he saw something that made his breath catch. "Now," she said simply, "I want to live again. That's when I knew, reading those letters decades later, that this wasn't just a story about rescue. This was a love story, born in impossibility, sustained by shared trauma and hope, and the desperate human need to believe that goodness still existed somewhere in the darkness. But what I didn't know yet, what James himself didn't know, was just how complicated loving someone could become when the whole world was trying to kill them. Mason noticed it first. He took James aside one morning while Rachel was washing at a small stream nearby, her movements still careful, still pained, but growing stronger each day. "Sir," Mason said carefully, "I've been thinking about what happens when we reach our lines." "We hand her over to refugee services," James replied automatically. "They'll process her, get her to England eventually." Mason nodded, but his eyes said he didn't believe it. "And then what? You put her in the system and walk away? Go back to your unit like nothing happened?" James didn't answer because he had no good answer. He'd been trying not to think about it, trying to focus only on the immediate problem of survival. But Mason's words forced him to confront what he'd been hiding from himself. The truth was, he couldn't imagine it. Couldn't imagine leaving Rachel in some refugee camp. Couldn't imagine returning to his old life with its old certainties. Something fundamental had shifted inside him. Some tectonic plate of the soul moving in ways that would reshape everything that came after. But loving her, truly loving her, would mean making choices that could destroy them both. That evening, as they sat around the fire sharing their meager rations, Davies dropped his own bombshell. "I've been watching the patrols," he said quietly. "Patterns changed. They're not just sweeping anymore, they're hunting. Someone's told them there's a British unit in these woods, and they're willing to burn half of Belgium to find us." The implication hung in the cold air, unspoken but understood. Someone had informed, and the Germans wouldn't stop until they found what they were looking for. Rachel's face had gone pale, her hand instinctively reaching for the yellow star she'd removed from her coat days ago. "Is because of me," she whispered. "They look for me. I should." "No." James's voice was steel. "You're not leaving, you're not surrendering, you're not even finishing that sentence." "But, Rachel." He took her hand, feeling how small it was in his, how fragile, how strong. "I made you a promise. I told you that you were safe. I don't break my promises. Even if promise cost you life?" James looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just the girl he'd saved from the snow, but someone who had become essential to him in ways he was only beginning to understand. Saw the future he hadn't known he wanted until it appeared in front of him. Impossible and perfect and doomed. "Yes," he said simply. "Even then." That was the night James wrote his second letter, the one that would change everything. The one that would set in motion a chain of events that would ripple through decades, affecting people not yet born, creating consequences that would find their way to me, to my attic, to the moment I held that photograph and realized my entire family history was a carefully constructed lie. But I'm getting ahead of myself. What happened next would test James's promise in ways none of them could have anticipated. The German deserter appeared on the 12th day, and James nearly shot him. It was dawn, the forest still gray with pre-light, when Mason's hand signal froze everyone in place. A figure was approaching through the trees, alone, stumbling, moving with the exhausted gait of someone who'd been walking all night. James raised his rifle, his finger finding the trigger, his body remembering all the lessons of war. Then the figure called out, his hands raised, his voice desperate and young. "Bit, please don't shoot. I am friend. I am deserter." He was younger than Mason, maybe 19, his Wehrmacht uniform torn and dirty, his face haunted by something worse than fear. Later, they would learn his name was Friedrich, that he'd been conscripted from a small village near Munich, that he'd watched his unit execute a family, including children, for hiding Jews, and that something in him had simply broken. "I cannot do this more," he told them in broken English, his hands shaking. "I cannot be this person. I see you 3 days past, carrying the girl. I know what she is. I know what my commanders will do if they find her. I know also what they will do to you for helping." James studied him, searching for deception, for trap, for the 1,000 ways this could go wrong. But all he saw was a kid who'd been forced to become a monster and was desperately trying to find his way back to being human. "Why are you here?" James asked. Friedrich's eyes found Rachel, who stood frozen behind the makeshift barricade, her face a mask of terror. To her, he was the enemy, the uniform, the language, the face of everyone who'd destroyed her world. But Friedrich's expression as he looked at her wasn't hatred or threat. It was shame so deep it seemed to hollow him out. "My sister," he said softly. "She was like you. Different religion, but they take her also. I hear about the camps. I hear what happens there. I cannot save her." His voice broke. "But maybe I can help you save this one. Maybe it's not too late for me." The silence that followed was heavy with possibility and risk. Davy shook his head, his meaning clear. Trust no German, not even a deserter. Mason looked uncertain, young enough to believe in redemption, but old enough to fear its price. Rachel said nothing, her hand clutching at James's sleeve, her body trembling. But James was thinking about the patrols, about the tightening noose, about the letter he'd written the night before, a letter that Friedrich's information could make possible or doom completely. "Tell me about the patrols," James said finally. What Friedrich told them changed everything. The Germans weren't just searching randomly. They'd found the shepherd's hut where James's unit had sheltered, found evidence of Rachel's presence, found enough to know that British soldiers were harboring a Jewish fugitive. The local SS commander, a man named Richter who'd made his reputation hunting Jews through Belgium's forests, had called in reinforcements. 20 additional men, 2 dogs trained to track scents through snow, and a promise of promotions for whoever brought in the fugitives. "He is obsessed," Friedrich said, the word coming with difficulty. "He has book. List of all Jews who escape in this region. He mark each one when they are caught. The girl," he gestured to Rachel. "She is last name unchecked. He will not stop until." He didn't need to finish. They all understood. But Friedrich had something else, something that made James's heart race with desperate hope. He had papers. Blank identity cards stolen from the administrative office where he'd been stationed, complete with official stamps and signatures. Not perfect, but good enough to pass a roadside inspection, maybe good enough to get Rachel across Allied lines. "I bring them for her," Friedrich said, pulling the documents from inside his coat. "And I bring information. There is checkpoint, 10 kilometers west, that change guards at dawn. 5 minutes when road is not watched. If you move fast, it's a trap," Davy said flatly. "Has to be. Germans don't just hand over escape routes." But James was looking at Friedrich's face, at the raw desperation there, at the same look he'd seen in Rachel's eyes that first day in the snow. The look of someone who'd lost everything and was trying to find a single reason to keep living. "Show me the checkpoint on the map," James said. What happened next would define all their fates. Friedrich drew crude diagrams in the dirt, explaining patrol patterns, guard rotations, the exact layout of the checkpoint. As he talked, James felt the pieces of an impossible plan falling into place. Dangerous, likely suicidal, but possible. Just barely possible. But the plan would require something James wasn't sure he could do. It would require lying to Rachel, creating a false identity, so complete she'd have to forget who she was, teaching her to pass as someone else, to bury every visible piece of her Jewish heritage deep enough that not even trained observers would find it. And it would require separating from her, at least temporarily. She would have to go through the checkpoint alone while James and his men created a diversion. If it worked, she'd be in Allied territory. If it failed, "No," Rachel said when he explained it to her later, away from the others. "No is too dangerous. If Germans catch you because of diversion, then they catch me," James said simply. "But you'll be safe." "I don't want safe if you are dead." The words hung between them, raw and honest and devastating, because they both knew what she'd actually said, what she'd admitted without meaning to, what changed everything between them. James reached out, his hand cupping her face with a gentleness that seemed impossible given how much death those hands had dealt. "Rachel," he said softly, "listen to me. I am going to get you out of this forest. I am going to get you to England." And then he paused, aware that what he was about to promise would define the rest of his life. "And then I am going to find you again, no matter how long it takes, no matter what I have to do. This isn't goodbye. This is just the hard part." Tears streamed down her face, silent and endless. "You promise? I promise. You promise already once. In the snow. You keep that promise. And I'll keep this one too." That night, James wrote the most important letter of his life. Not to his commanding officer, not to military intelligence. Those would come later, carefully sanitized. This letter was different. This letter was addressed to a woman named Helen Ashford, his mother's closest friend, who lived in a small village in Yorkshire and who had, over years of friendship, become the keeper of the Whitmore family's deepest secrets. The letter was coded, carefully worded, but its message was clear. "I need you to help someone. I need you to hide someone. I need you to do something that could get you arrested, imprisoned, maybe worse. And I need you to do it because I'm asking, and because it's right, and because I love her even though I've known her for barely 2 weeks, and loving her might destroy everything I've ever been." What I didn't know, holding that letter in my grandmother's attic 70 years later, was that Helen Ashford was my father's godmother, that she'd kept this secret until her death, that the web of lies and love and impossible choices extended far deeper into my family than anyone had imagined. But that revelation was still ahead of me. First, I had to read what happened at the checkpoint. First, I had to learn the price of promises made in wartime. The checkpoint appeared through the morning mist like something from a nightmare. All barbed wire and guard towers and men with rifles who looked bored with the routine of determining who lived and who died. James watched from the tree line, his stomach tight with fear, as Rachel walked toward it with Friedrich beside her, her new papers clutched in hands that had learned to stop trembling. She looked different. They'd dyed her hair lighter using bark and ash, styled it in waves like the German women wore. The clothes Friedrich had stolen for her were crisp and proper. The dress of a Belgian civilian fleeing the fighting. Nothing that would attract attention. Her new identity card said her name was Marie Dubois, Catholic, born in Brussels, traveling to stay with relatives in Allied territory. Everything depended on her performance. Everything depended on her forgetting, just for a few minutes, every trauma that had made her who she was. Everything depended on the guards being bored enough, distracted enough, human enough to wave her through without too many questions. James had timed the diversion perfectly. At exactly 6:15, as Rachel reached the checkpoint barrier, Mason would create an explosion 300 meters east, just big enough to pull attention, not big enough to bring reinforcements. In the confusion, Rachel would slip through. Simple, clean, absolutely insane. He watched through borrowed binoculars as Rachel approached the first guard, offering her papers, her face calm in a way that must have cost her everything. The guard looked at the papers, looked at her face, looked back at the papers. James's finger tightened on his rifle trigger, ready to do something desperate and stupid if this went wrong. Then the guard nodded, handing back her papers, gesturing toward the barrier. Relief flooded through James so powerfully he nearly missed what happened next. A second guard emerged from the checkpoint station, taller, older, wearing the insignia of an SS officer. He said something to the first guard, who immediately snapped to attention. Then the SS officer turned his attention to Rachel, and James felt his blood turn to ice. It was Richter, the hunter, the man Friedrich had warned them about. Through the binoculars, James watched Richter study Rachel with the focused intensity of a predator who'd finally found his prey. Watched him take her papers, examine them slowly, deliberately. watched him ask questions that made Rachel's careful composure start to crack at the edges. This was the moment when everything could shatter. Mason's explosion came exactly on schedule, a thunderous boom that shook the forest, sending birds screaming into the gray sky. Guards shouted, rifles raised, everyone's attention snapping toward the smoke rising above the trees. In the chaos, Rachel should have been waved through, forgotten in the larger emergency. But Richter never took his eyes off her. James saw it happening like a slow-motion nightmare. Saw Richter grab Rachel's arm, saw her stumble, saw the yellow star, the one she thought she'd burned, fall from her pocket where it must have been hidden, must have been kept as some kind of talisman or memory. Saw it land in the mud at Richter's feet, bright and damning and absolute. For one frozen heartbeat, no one moved. Then everything happened at once. Richter's hand went to his pistol. Friedrich, who'd been standing at a careful distance, suddenly lunged forward, shouting in German, his body between Rachel and the gun. Other guards turned, confused, trying to understand why one of their own was defending a Jew. Rachel ran, her survival instincts finally overwhelming her shock, sprinting toward the tree line with desperate speed. And James made a choice that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He could have stayed hidden, could have let the chaos play out, trusted that Rachel would make it to cover, preserve the mission and his men and himself. That's what his training dictated. That's what any rational soldier would have done. Instead, he stood up, raised his rifle, and fired directly at Richter. The shot caught the SS officer in the shoulder, spinning him around, his pistol firing wild into the air. Then James was running, crashing through the underbrush, drawing fire from a dozen different directions, his only thought to reach Rachel before the bullets did. He found her 50 meters into the forest, her breath coming in panicked gasps, her eyes wide with terror and something else, guilt maybe, or shame that he'd broken cover for her. James grabbed her hand, pulled her deeper into the trees, heard Davies and Mason laying down covering fire behind them, heard Friedrich's voice shouting something in German that might have been a warning or a prayer. They ran for what felt like hours but was probably minutes, Rachel stumbling but never falling, James's hand locked around hers like if he let go she'd disappear back into the nightmare they'd just escaped. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew closer, dogs barking, men shouting, the methodical efficiency of trained soldiers executing a search pattern. When they finally stopped in a dense thicket, both gasping for air, Rachel looked at him with tears streaming down her face. "The star," she whispered. "I keep it. I don't know why I keep it. Is stupid, is dangerous, but is all I have left of my father. He sew it for me when Germans order it. He cry when he do it. And I cannot throw away the last thing he touch." James pulled her close, feeling her body shake against his, feeling his own heart hammer against his ribs. "It's okay," he said, knowing nothing was okay anymore. "We'll figure this out." No. Rachel pushed back, her eyes fierce despite the tears. "You figure nothing. You go back to your men. You leave me. I will hide. I will survive like I survived before. But you cannot die for me. You cannot throw away your life because I am stupid girl who keeps stupid star. Rachel, promise me." Her voice broke. "Promise me you will not die for me. Promise me you will live. Promise me you will go home to England and have life and be happy and forget about girl in forest who." James kissed her. It wasn't planned, wasn't calculated, wasn't any of the 1,000 things he'd imagined a first kiss should be. It was desperate and salt-tasting from tears, and probably the worst possible timing in human history. But it was also perfect. When they finally pulled apart, Rachel was staring at him like he'd just rewritten the laws of physics. "I'm not leaving you," James said simply. "I'm not forgetting you. And I'm sure as hell not going to be happy without you. So we're going to do this the hard way. We're going to run and hide and fight and survive, and somehow, impossibly, we're going to make it out of this forest together. Both of us. That's not a request, Rachel. That's a promise." Rachel touched his face, her fingers gentle, her eyes searching his for any hint of doubt. "You are crazy man," she whispered. "Probably," James agreed. "But I'm your crazy man now." Behind them, the dogs were getting closer. Ahead of them, the path to safety had just gotten infinitely more complicated. But in that moment, holding each other in a forest that wanted them dead, they both knew they'd just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Little did I know, reading this part of the story, that what happened next would be even more devastating, that the crisis was only beginning, that the price of love in wartime hadn't even been calculated yet. They found Davies 3 hours later, propped against a tree with his rifle across his lap and a smile on his pale face that said he'd known this was coming. "Got my leg in the retreat," he said calmly, gesturing to the tourniquet that wasn't stopping the bleeding anymore. "Slowed us down too much. You two need to keep moving." "We're not leaving you," James said automatically, but even as the words came out, he knew they were facing an impossible calculation. Davies couldn't walk. They couldn't carry him and stay ahead of the pursuit. Every minute they delayed was a minute closer to capture. Davies seemed to read his thoughts. "I figure I can buy you maybe 20 minutes. Get to the river. Follow it north until you hit the old mill." Friedrich drew it on the map. "There's a resistance contact there who can get you across the border. You'll make it, sir. Both of you." "Lieutenant," Mason started, his voice breaking. "That's an order, Private." Davies's voice was steady, almost peaceful. "I'm done running. Been done for a while now, if I'm honest. But you too, you've got something to run for. Don't waste it." James knew he should argue, should refuse, should do anything but accept this sacrifice. But the dogs were getting closer, and Rachel was swaying on her feet with exhaustion. And Davies was right. This was the only way. He knelt beside his corporal, this man who'd followed him through hell without question, and gripped his hand. "I'll make sure they know," he said quietly. "I'll make sure everyone knows what you did." Davies laughed, a sound with more blood than humor in it. "No, you won't. You'll tell them I died gloriously in combat, and you'll keep that girl's name out of every official report, and you'll live the kind of life that makes all this worth it. That's what you'll do, sir." Then he looked at Rachel, his expression softening. "You take care of him, yeah? He's too noble for his own good. Someone needs to keep him alive." Rachel moved forward, knelt beside Davies, and did something that stunned both British soldiers. She kissed his forehead, gentle as a benediction, and spoke to him in Hebrew, words James didn't understand but felt in his bones. A blessing, maybe, or a prayer, or simply thank you, in a language as old as sacrifice itself. When they left him there, James didn't look back. Looking back would have broken something in him he needed to keep whole for what was coming next. But he heard the first shot start 5 minutes later, heard Davies's rifle answering the Germans with methodical precision, buying them time with the currency of his life. The resistance contact at the mill was a woman in her 60s named Genevieve who took one look at them. Filthy, exhausted, wanted by every German soldier in Belgium, and simply nodded. "You are the British soldier with the girl," she said in excellent English. "We've been waiting for you." That's when James learned about the letter. His letter to Helen Ashford had traveled faster than he'd imagined, passing through channels he didn't know existed, triggering a network of people willing to risk everything to move one Jewish girl from danger to safety. Helen had contacted Genevieve's son, who was with the British intelligence service. He'd contacted resistance cells throughout Belgium and France. A chain of safe houses had been established, documents prepared, risks calculated and accepted. All of it for Rachel. All of it because James had written one letter asking for the impossible. "Your friend Helen," Genevieve said, pouring them weak tea with hands that trembled slightly. "She write me also. She say to tell you that there is cottage in Yorkshire, small and hidden, that will be ready when you come home. She say." The old woman paused, her eyes finding Rachel with grandmother's gentleness. "She say that some promises are worth more than regulations. That love is worth more than war." James felt something in his chest crack open. Some wall he'd been maintaining between duty and desire, between what he was supposed to do and what he actually wanted. He'd been so focused on getting Rachel to safety that he hadn't let himself imagine what came after. Hadn't let himself hope that after could include both of them, together, building something real from the wreckage of this war. But now, listening to Genevieve describe the network of people ready to hide Rachel, to protect her, to help her disappear into the British countryside, he let himself hope. "There is complication," Genevieve continued, her expression turning grave. "The Germans, they know about you now, about the Jewish girl and the British soldier. Richter," he put out, "how you say bulletin? Your faces, both of you, with very large reward. Every collaborator, every desperate person, they will be looking." "Then we split up," James said immediately. "Rachel goes through your network. I return to my unit." "No." Rachel's voice was quiet but absolute. "Not again. No more promises to find each other later. No more splitting up. Rachel, if we stay together, we're twice as visible. I don't care. The reward is enough to feed a family for a year. I don't care." She was standing now, all 5 feet of her, skinny and exhausted and absolutely immovable. "You promise me we survive together. You say both of us or none. You kiss me and make me believe that maybe there is future that is not just running and hiding. Now you want to take back promise." Mason, who'd been silent since Davies's death, spoke up quietly. "Sir, she's right. You split up now, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering if she made it. If some collaborator turned her in for the reward. If she's alive or dead or waiting for you somewhere you'll never find. That'll kill you slower than any German bullet." James looked at the 3 of them, Rachel fierce and frightened, Mason grieving but determined, Genevieve wise with the kind of wisdom that comes from surviving too many wars. And he realized they were right. He'd already made his choice in that forest clearing when he picked up a dying girl instead of leaving her. Everything since then had just been the consequences of that choice unfolding. "All right," he said finally. "We stay together. What do you need from us?" What Genevieve needed was simple and impossible. She needed them to become different people. Not just new names and forged papers, but new identities so deep they became truth. James would become Jacques Mercier, a Belgian civilian who'd worked as a translator for the Germans until conscience drove him to flee. Rachel would become his wife, Marie, mute from trauma, which would explain why she couldn't speak and risk her accent betraying her. They had 3 days to learn their new history before the next link in the chain arrived to move them closer to Allied lines. 3 days to become Jacques and Marie, to practice their story, to build a shared past out of necessity and hope. On the second night, while Mason kept watch and Genevieve slept in the mill house, James and Rachel sat by the small fire in the hidden cellar, memorizing the lies that would keep them alive. "We meet in Brussels," Rachel recited, her English improving with each passing day. "I am seamstress, you are translator. We marry in secret because your family does not approve. Because you're Catholic and I'm supposed to be Protestant," James continued. "We plan to leave Belgium together, but the war separates us. I search for you for 2 years, finally find you in a refugee camp near Antwerp, where I am injured by shelling," Rachel finished. "I lose ability to speak. You take care of me. We run together." They fell silent, the fictional marriage hanging between them like a prophecy. Finally, Rachel spoke, her voice small in the darkness. "It's funny, yes? We create pretend marriage to save our lives. But," she paused, gathering courage, "but is not feeling pretend anymore. Is feeling more real than anything else in this war." James took her hand, the one with the faded numbers tattooed on the wrist, the one that had clutched at snow trying to find a reason to keep living. "When we get to England," he said slowly, "when this is over and you're safe and we don't have to pretend anymore, I want to make it real. Not because it's convenient, not because it's the only way to protect you, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it. because you've become essential to me in ways I didn't know were possible. Because I love you, Rachel. I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it." Rachel was crying, but this time they were different tears, not fear or grief or exhaustion, but something that looked almost like joy. "You are asking me to marry you?" she whispered. "I'm asking you to think about it, to consider that maybe something good can come from all this horror, to believe that we deserve a future." She touched his face, her fingers tracing the lines of exhaustion and determination there. "I am already believing it," she said softly. "From the moment you lift me from snow, I am believing it. I'm just waiting for you to believe it also." He kissed her then, properly this time, with all the tenderness and promise and desperate hope that he'd been holding back. And in that hidden cellar, surrounded by war and death and impossible choices, they made a promise that wasn't for survival or necessity, but simply because they'd found something worth fighting for. What I didn't know, holding those letters 70 years later, was that they never made it to England. That the next part of the story would break my heart in ways I'm still learning to process. That the price of promises in wartime is always higher than anyone imagines. They were 3 kilometers from Allied lines when Friedrich found them again. He appeared like a ghost, stumbling out of the tree line with blood on his uniform and desperation in his eyes. "They know your route," he gasped in broken English. "Richter, he capture one of the network, torture him, learn about the safe houses. He is ahead of you, waiting at the border crossing with 20 men. Is trap. You walk into trap." James's mind raced through alternatives, routes, possibilities. They could go south, add 2 days to the journey. Could hide and wait for the situation to change. Could try to find another crossing point, though that risked running into patrols neither of them knew about. Or they could trust Friedrich one more time. "There is other way," the young German continued, his words coming in panicked bursts. "Through the old mine shaft under the border. Is dangerous, is possibly collapsed, but is not watched. I can show you. I can guide you through." "Why?" James asked. "Why are you still helping us?" Friedrich's eyes found Rachel, and in them James saw a grief so profound it seemed to hollow him out from the inside. "Because I cannot save my sister," he said simply. "But maybe God forgive me if I save someone else's." The mine was everything Friedrich had promised, dangerous, claustrophobic, possibly suicidal. They crawled through darkness so complete it seemed to have weight, through passages that narrowed until they had to exhale to squeeze through water that rose to their chests and made every breath a negotiation with panic. But they made it. On the other side of the border, in Allied territory, they emerged into spring sunlight like creatures being born into a new world. Mason collapsed immediately, laughing with relief. Rachel was shaking so hard she couldn't stand. And James. James turned to thank Friedrich, to offer him sanctuary with them, to promise that his sacrifice wouldn't be forgotten. But Friedrich was already backing away, shaking his head. "I cannot go with you," he said. "I am still Wehrmacht. I am still enemy. I have done things. Before I understand, before I know what I was doing, there is no redemption for me in your world." "Friedrich, but I give you something," the young German interrupted. He pulled a small leather journal from his coat, pressed it into James's hands. "Is my testimony. What I see. What I do. The camps, the murders, all of it. When war is over, when you are trying to understand what happened, maybe this help. Maybe someone must know that not all Germans were monsters. Some of us just took too long to remember we were human." Then he was gone, disappearing back into the mine before James could argue, before any of them could thank him properly, before they could tell him that redemption might still be possible if he just believed in it. They never saw him again. Later, James would learn that Friedrich had been captured at the border, court-martialed for desertion, and executed. But hidden in that journal were details that would help convict 3 SS officers at Nuremberg, testimony that would save lives by bearing witness to how they were lost. The last entry in Friedrich's journal was dated the day he found them at the border. It said simply, "Today I helped two people who love each other escape death. Maybe this is not redemption, but maybe it is enough to prove I am still human, that I can still choose mercy over orders. That love is worth more than war." And reading those words in my grandmother's attic, I finally understood what my grandfather had been carrying all those years. Not just the weight of survival, but the weight of grace undeserved, of love earned through suffering, of promises kept when keeping them cost everything. The official record says that Lieutenant James Whitmore returned to his unit after completing a successful reconnaissance mission behind enemy lines. It says he was decorated for valor, that he served until the end of the war, that he married a Belgian refugee named Marie in 1946 and brought her home to Yorkshire. It doesn't mention that Marie's real name was Rachel, that the marriage certificate was the second one, the official one, because the first had been performed by a resistance priest in a hidden cellar while German patrols searched the streets above. It doesn't mention the forgery, the fear, the network of people who conspired to hide the truth, that a British soldier had fallen in love with a Jewish girl and rewritten every rule to save her. It doesn't mention that they had a son in 1947, that they named him David in honor of Rachel's father who died at Auschwitz, that Rachel never spoke about the war, never shared her trauma with anyone except James, that she carried it like a stone in her chest until she died peacefully in 1982, her hand in her husband's, her last words in Hebrew that only he understood. It doesn't mention that James kept every letter, every forged document, every piece of evidence of their impossible love hidden in that military footlocker for 60 years. That he told his son nothing, his grandchildren nothing, protecting Rachel's secrets even after death because he'd promised her safety, and safety meant silence. But I found the truth, found the letters, the photographs, the journal Friedrich had given them, found Helen Ashford's correspondence, found testimony from resistance members who'd helped, found the real marriage certificate from that cellar ceremony signed by witnesses who'd risked their lives to stand with them. And I found something else. At the bottom of the footlocker, wrapped in cloth that had once been a yellow star, was a ring. Simple gold, inscribed with words in both English and Hebrew. "You lifted me from snow. I lifted you from darkness. Together we survived." It was Rachel's wedding ring, the real one, not the official one from 1946. James had kept it all these years, this tiny circle of metal that represented everything they'd been through, everything they'd survived, everything they'd built from the ashes of war. I'm wearing it now as I write this. My grandmother's ring. The ring that represents the most beautiful and terrible love story I've ever heard. The ring that proves that sometimes mercy is stronger than war. That love can transcend the boundaries we draw between acceptable and forbidden. That a single choice to show kindness to a stranger can ripple through generations. So I ask you now, which part of this story surprised you most? Was it Friedrich's sacrifice? Rachel's strength? James's courage? The network of people willing to risk everything for love? Tell me in the comments below. And please subscribe to this channel for more true stories of love in impossible times. Because these stories matter. These people mattered. And their choices, the hard ones, the brave ones, the ones that cost everything, those choices created the world we live in today. Remember them, honor them, and never forget that kindness, even in the darkest times, can change everything.